It's time for this week's episode of Brandon's Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon's Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview Above the Yellow Lines podcast, NASCAR content creator, and Taylor Kitchen. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to start a sports NASCAR podcast?
Yeah, so it kind of it came out of boredom, and it also came out of just wanting to connect with other people. I've been a fan of the sport since 2016, and for a long time I live in a small town. Nobody talks about NASCAR except for, me and my grandma, and that was great, but I wanted more of a community. So 2021, I sat down and I was like, you know what? I don't see anyone else like me doing shows like this. And I wanted to just start something a little different. And uh I came up with Above the Yellow Line. My dad helped me figure out the name. And since then it's just kind of stuck, and it's been a really fun journey.
How did you know you wanted to come out with the podcast of Above the Yellow Line?
I think again it was a sense of community, and it was me wanting to do something bigger. It was me wanting to challenge myself. I've known how to edit for a long time. I went to school for broadcast journalism. I did a lot of stuff with my school's film club in high school, and I always knew I wanted to tell stories and work in media. And for me, doing a podcast was kind of a way to do that.
What was it like covering and being a freelance writer for NASCAR?
So I am not a freelance writer for NASCAR. I did freelance writing for an outlet called the Podium Finish. And that's kind of where I got my start. And the owner of that outlet, Rob Tiongson, was a great mentor for me and helped me kind of get in the groove of how you do recaps for races, how you do previews for races, features for certain drivers. And from there, I also honed my skills in college of writing. And that was really interesting. And though I appreciate the writing side of journalism and it's so necessary, I found that's not really my strong suit. So that's why I focused on video, and I find that I do much better there.
Of course, what was that experience like being the director of digital media?
Yeah, so I am the director of digital media and marketing for AT Racing Development, Austin Terrio, Arca Champ, and that has been a wild experience. I originally, when the job was presented to me, it was a lot to take on. It was basically creating their whole media department. But since then, it's been an incredible journey. I've been with them for a year now, working with one of their drivers, Howie DiSavino III, and working with him and his team. They've taken me in like family. Austin's taken me in like family, and it has been such a cool experience to learn from him, basically as a mentor, but to also kind of pave my own way into this field from behind the camera. I also now work with the Hornadays for Team Hornaday Development as of a few months ago, and learning from Candace Hornaday and working with their drivers has also been an incredible experience.
Of course, what was that experience like becoming the director of YouTube for a website?
That's been exciting. Originally, TobyChristie.com, a Toby Christie of that outlet, he reached out to me on Twitter and was like, "Hey, I like your content. Here's my phone number. Call me." And I have followed his work for years prior, so it was a big deal for him to reach out to me. And we talked, and he's like, "Hey, we have an opening on our YouTube channel. We want you to just kind of take over. We love your content. We want you to put it on here." And after we talked a little bit, we came to the conclusion, like, yeah, this is a great move for me and for him. And so far I've been with his channel since last April, so again over a year, and that's been really cool. Toby's been great at letting me really just keep creative control of my content, has allowed me to kind of do what I want, but has also been a great guiding force in helping me get into the industry a little bit more on the media side of things. So that's been awesome.
Of course, what was that feeling like getting to put your podcast and your YouTube channel on that platform?
It's big. Toby is very well known in NASCAR. He's a really respectable journalist, and the team that he's put together is awesome. And I've made some lifelong friends from his from his crew and everyone that works with him. So being able to put my work onto a platform of a trusted source has been big. It's a major responsibility. I know the platform that I represent, not only my brand, but his brand and his team. And it's a responsibility I'm proud to have. And he has a great audience. When I started on his YouTube channel, we had about 800 subscribers. Now we're well over 2,000. And that's been awesome to help build that with his team and just pushing out some great content for people.
Of course, what segments do you have on Above the Yellow Line?
That's changed over the years. And I would say it came out of being over ambitious. I used to do a segment called Hot or Not, which drivers are hot, which ones aren't right now, who's struggling. I used to do a segment called To Watch, To Worry, drivers before we went into the next race weekend that could potentially win the race, drivers who couldn't. Obviously above the yellow line, I had a segment doing that, and I still do this segment where I rate the race above or below the yellow line. Basically, if it's above a 50%, we're good. If it's below, it's not the best race. So there's a few segments there that I've gotten rid of, added on, but this one is here to stay. We're keeping this segment forever.
Of course, what is that experience like getting to review the NASCAR video games?
That's been really interesting. I grew up playing Mario Kart and playing all the Mario games, and I played some like Super Smash Bros. And really just kind of a light gamer, I guess, for a lack of a better word. And my significant other, he's a really big gamer, and he got me into the gaming world. And just kind of on coincidence with the new NASCAR games that have been coming out the past few years, and having even one of my own that I didn't realize I had. I think my brother might have gotten it. I was like, you know what? I think it's time to just take a dive into these games, and learning it has been exciting. Learning more about the iRacing world has been really cool too. I have yet to get a subscription to iRacing and do that. Hopefully this year is the year. But learning the games has been really fun. And even just last year we partnered with to do the preview for NASCAR Ignition and everything like that. So that was really fun to be a part of that experience too.
Of course, what has that been like, obviously getting to go to these racetracks and getting to cover the content there?
It's been cool. I covered my first race for media last year at Mid-Ohio for Truck and ARCA, and I'm excited in the next like 3 weeks to be doing that again. Every time at the racetrack is really fun. It's a great opportunity. And in the position I'm in, not only working in the industry, but also kind of being an advocate for fans, it's been cool to go to the track as a fan and continue to experience that with my family and with my significant other. And it's a really exciting experience and an opportunity I don't take for granted. But when you work a race for media versus, being there as a fan, it's a totally different experience. And there's a set of rules that NASCAR has for media members, like you can't take pictures with the drivers, can't ask for autographs. And that's to maintain the integrity of working at a NASCAR race. Otherwise, you could just be a fan all you want, but it's a totally different mindset you're in. And I really enjoy just being at a track and working. It's really a dream come true.
Of course, as you talked about that, what is that like, obviously balancing being that NASCAR fan, but also being a member of the media and covering NASCAR?
It is a tough balance. It's not a balance that I've mastered. Some probably have done it better than me. Some have not, but I follow the rules. I'm always a rule follower. I don't break the rules. I don't like to. So if I have a VIP badge that I'm wearing at the track, I'm a fan that day. If I have a media badge, I am covering stories. I'm doing interviews. I am writing. I might do some videos, but it is all strictly from the standpoint of I'm there to work and I have a mission that I need to accomplish that day. When I'm at home, it's a little different. I talk about things from the fan perspective, but where I see my content and myself being different from other fan content is I back it up with quotes. I back it up with stats. I back up my opinions with what actually happened on the track. And sometimes when there's fans that talk as if they're media, they let their opinions get the best of them. I don't like to do that. And if my opinion's wrong, I'm totally fine with that. But I base my opinions on facts. And I think that's a key factor that separates the fan from the media side of things.
Of course, what does that process look like to get media credentials for a NASCAR race such as the Charlotte Motor Speedway?
Yeah, so getting a credential for media for the NASCAR race, you can apply a few different ways. Sometimes you apply directly through the track. On the track website, they might have a request form. or even just through NASCAR and their media process. And sometimes with NASCAR, if you go to enough races during the year as media, you can get what they call a hard card, which basically gives you access to all the tracks, the entire season. And that's just kind of to cut the hassle of having to apply for a credential every single race. So there's a few different ways to do it. There's a few different ways to get those credentials, but usually you apply through the tracks or through NASCAR themselves.
Whereas being a member of the media, what is that like? Obviously, having that back seat access to see behind the garage.
It's interesting. I think when you watch interviews and when you see a driver just like on camera, that's one side of them. When you take the cameras away, and even just as a media member, if you just stand and observe, and I love to do this when I'm in the garage area, I just stand and watch everybody work. It's totally different. You see the drivers open up a little bit more because there's not a camera shoved in their face. They're not having to answer tough questions. It's them either goofing around or it's them helping their team. Maybe it's a driver that you might not have the best opinion of, but you see them at the track working with their team, fixing the car, or talking to their crew members, talking to maybe a kid that's a huge fan of this driver, and it changes your perspective of them entirely. I think having that back seat, and especially working with AT Racing Development and Team Hornaday Development, is you understand what these drivers go through a lot more. And when I go to commentate as a fan or from the media side of things, I'm able to basically talk about things from two sides. So I think that's given me some great perspective there.
What are some of the races that you are a favorite of?
I think last year I went to the Coca-Cola 600 as a fan, and that was one of the coolest experiences of my life. It was incredible. I mean, just the scope of that race. It's the longest race of the NASCAR season. It's 600 miles. And last year's race actually was the longest race in NASCAR history. There were so many overtimes and yellows and cautions and everything in between. And I feel like I stood for almost all 6 hours of that race. And it was some of the best racing I had seen in my time as a fan since 2016. And I was like ecstatic to hear other people say that it was the best race they've ever seen in a long time, that have been a fan longer than me. And to be there in person, I was so lucky to see that. And I will say too, Michigan International Speedway, they put on great races as well. And it's a track that I didn't really think of starting off, because when you start off as a fan, you think of Talladega, Daytona, Charlotte. Those are the big three tracks, in my opinion. When you go to a track like Michigan or even Kentucky that's no longer on the schedule, you're like, all right, I hope the racing's good, and that it is. So I would say Michigan's also up there as well.
Of course, when talking about schedule, how do you process the schedule and what races you go to, whether it's going to Richmond Motor Speedway or going to Charlotte Motor Speedway?
So a lot of times it has to do with travel distance, and it has to do with the cost of travel, depending on where you go. So that's why this year I'll be covering the race for media at Michigan International Speedway for the first time. And it's a quick drive. It's one state away, so it's really easy for me to go to. I'll be able to work that with one of my buddies, which is great. And then Mid-Ohio is kind of in my backyard. It's a few hours away, an hour and a half away from my home. And that's an easy drive that me and my friends can make. And we'll be covering the race there for TobyChristie.com. So a lot of it has to do with distance, but when we go to tracks, or when I've gone to tracks as a fan, like Charlotte Motor Speedway, it's really about the experience that you get there. And for me, I like to go to one race a year as a fan, just so I can just itch the part of the fan in me that really just wants to see a race from that perspective. And taking my family to that race in particular has been so fun. And so I guess in a sense, that's how I choose the ones I want to go to as a fan. The ones that have like the great experience, and to work is sometimes the ones where you have the most drama and the ones that are the closest to you.
Who are some of the NASCAR drivers that you've had the privilege of interviewing?
The one interview I talk about all the time is Matt DiBenedetto, former Cup driver. He's now in the Truck Series. I interviewed him last year at Mid-Ohio. It was a really quick turnaround with how this interview happened. All the truck drivers were in like a picnic area signing hero cards for fans. And I went up to his PR rep, Monty, and I was like, hey, can I interview Matt? Is that okay? He's like, yeah, but we're going to be riding back on our golf cart because we got to like get into the hauler and we got to go. We got to race. And I was like, all right. So I sat with Matt DiBenedetto on his golf cart, riding back to his hauler, and just talked to him. And it was the most bizarre interview I've ever done, but it was also one of the most joyful because the situation was just wild. And after I turned the camera off, we talked about his dogs and What he does when the truck series isn't racing, kind of talked about home life for a few minutes, and then I shook his hand and I left. But that was one driver I was excited to interview. I've interviewed Corey Heim and a few others as well. And this year I'm excited to interview more. Ryan Vargas is another interview I've done away from the track, and he's a great interview, a great guy.
Of course, in the interview process, do you only interview the truck series, or have you had the privilege of interviewing the Sprint Cup series?
So when I'm at the track, since I've only worked at media for the truck and ARCA series, I've interviewed those drivers in person. And this year I'll have the privilege of interviewing Cup and Xfinity and everything in between. So I'm very excited to get that experience firsthand in person. I have interviewed drivers from the Xfinity series on my podcast Above the Yellow Line when we do our live streams. Ryan Vargas, Howie DeSavino III is another one. Those are the drivers that I've had the privilege of talking to so far, and that I will get the privilege of talking to.
Who is your dream interview to interview as a NASCAR driver?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think about this all the time. For me, we talked about this before we started recording, but Kevin Harvick would be a great interview. He's a driver that I really latched onto when I first joined as a fan, one of the first veteran drivers. Same with Brad Keselowski. I would love to interview Brad Keselowski. Those two drivers are the ones that I connected with the most. Why? I'm not sure. I just like their demeanor. I like their attitude towards racing. They're really like not all talk. They don't talk a whole lot. And if they do, it's really insightful. And sometimes they might get into scuffles with other drivers, and that's something I'd like to talk about with them too. But it's their mentality behind the wheel that I appreciate so much. Another veteran driver, Kurt Busch, now retired, but I would love to talk to him. He's changed so much over the years, and just seeing how his career has kind of done a 180 would be really cool to talk about as well. I will say a younger driver, probably the dream interview is Ryan Blaney. He's the driver I started being a fan of. It was him and Chase Elliott, and Ryan Blaney is a driver that's really stuck with me. I appreciate all he does for his foundation, the Ryan Blaney Foundation, trying to fight for a cure for Alzheimer's, and everything he does outside the car, and just also his mentality behind the wheel has been fascinating for me. So that would be also a dream interview to have.
Of course, how have you been able to balance your life covering NASCAR and with Above the Yellow Line, and life outside of NASCAR covering Above the Yellow Line?
It's not an easy balance. It's not. I think something that a lot of people might know, might not know is for a time, I've just graduated college. So I was balancing being a full-time student, balancing at this point, I guess at the time, 2 jobs, 3 jobs at once. I was also working with my school's news station. So that's like 5 things to balance. And on top of that, a chronic illness that I deal with, that I'm a big advocate for. It's a form of dysautonomia. It's called POTS, not like pots and pans, but it stands for postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which is a mouthful. But it's not an easy illness to deal with. So dealing with, I guess, 6 things at once, plus family, plus needing to sleep, it's not easy. So a lot of it is making sure I'm organized, making sure that I get enough rest. And having the support of my friends and my family is also a great way to help balance, and just having open communication between me and those that I work for and work with. So not an easy balance, but if you're willing to open up and ask for help, or even to just staying organized and having whiteboards and note cards and Post-its and lists, that also helps me too.
Of course, what is something that you learned now that you didn't know before covering NASCAR?
A lot. I think kind of what I mentioned earlier, you see behind closed doors when you start to cover the sport, and especially when you start to work on the business side behind the scenes. You learn how the wheels turn, you learn how the car gets put together, how the drivers get media trained. You learn so much even about how drivers work their way through the ranks. And the sport's in an interesting place right now because it's very heavily focused on money. And I think that's a really interesting piece of the industry where we're not seeing a lot of drivers that are talent-based anymore working their way through the ranks, because it's all about funding. So seeing that switch in the industry too, and hearing about it behind closed doors, has been really interesting to hear, and it's very eye-opening. But I think something I would say I learned about myself in the process is just what I guess I could do more than I thought I could. I can reach new heights more than I thought I ever could. And even too, I would say 7 years ago, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, I didn't think I'd be working in this industry. I wanted to be an actor on Broadway. Like that was my dream, or a singer, or directing movies. Or the dream has changed so much over the past few years, but once I landed on motorsports, it's stuck, and it's sticking, and it's such a fun industry to be in. So I think above all, it's learning that this industry is different than I think I perceived it to be. Motorsports, and especially NASCAR, has such a stigma around it, and learning everything behind the scenes has helped me realize why there's that stigma, but also that there are people in this industry that are good, that have good values, and that it really is a family, and that work hard. And so that's been something interesting to learn as well.
Of course, what are some of your future plans with Above the Yellow Line?
Oh boy, that's also a good question. Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, maybe I want to make it like a media company where I have a bunch of shows under the umbrella, and I have a website, and I write articles for once. There's other times where I'm like, maybe it's going to be a company where I have drivers under my wing doing media for them, and maybe it can be both. So still playing around with what the future plans are. All I know is I want to grow the brand to be big. I want it to be recognized. I want to grow a bigger community than what we have. And I've been so fortunate with the community that I've built. My friends, Dom, Rob, Ben, Adam, Brandon, that we've built together has been incredible. So just building that brand recognition, uh, hopefully doing more shows, covering more series. Now that I have more time, maybe we dabble into IndyCar a little bit in the future. Maybe we dabble more into Xfinity, truck, ARCA, if I could handle all of that, because we're still working like 3 jobs right now. But growing the brand is a very vague answer, but that's the answer I'm going to give.
What advice would you give those people that are looking to become NASCAR sports reporters?
For me, I get so many DMs of people asking how to get started, or just asking questions about what to do. And my whole thing is just start. I mean, when I started Above the Yellow Line, it was out of boredom, and it was out of wanting to create a community for something that I loved. And a lot of it was like, oh, well, I have a camera from like 2012 when the quality's going to suck, and I don't have a microphone. I have my phone to record audio with. And that's what you got to do. If you wait until you're able to buy like $1,000 camera and a type of microphone like this and everything like that, you're not going to start when you want to, and you're going to get so behind. So my advice is start, always ask for help. Never be afraid to ask for help. That's a big thing for me. And always be open to learning more. If you're complacent in what you're doing right now, you're not open to advice, you're not open to ways to grow, you're not doing yourself any favors. So definitely doing that. And then the last piece of advice getting into reporting is carry yourself the way you would hope other people treat you. That's a big thing. Making sure that you are carrying yourself in a certain way, you have the standard set for yourself, and you're willing to just go out there and work and move up the ranks, ask for help, meet new people, network. That's a lot of advice, but it's advice that I've lived by, and it's advice that has gotten me to where I am today, and it will hopefully continue to help me grow.
What advice would you give those people that are looking to start their own NASCAR sports talk podcast like you have?
But I think for me, the same advice carries, but another thing too is try to do something different than what other people do. I mean, people will watch what you do based on your personality, and people will attach themselves to you because they like what you talk about, they like you. So being yourself is the biggest thing. If you're afraid people won't like you, sure. I've had a lot of people message me saying they don't like me, but that's fine. I know a ton of other people do. We make connections that way. So don't be afraid to be yourself, and don't be afraid to try something different than the normal, what everyone else is already talking about. And do so with integrity and base your opinions on facts. That's the biggest thing that I can have for NASCAR content creators. And if they want to do the creative side of things, like making funny videos like NASCAR murder mysteries on TikTok, or if they want to talk about historical moments in NASCAR, do more of that too. That's so fun to watch. But definitely find your path, find your audience, find what you're passionate about, and go forward with it. You do not have to do the same thing that other people's are doing.
That's great advice. Where can my listeners find you on social media and your podcast at?
Yeah, so you can follow me at Above the Yellow Line on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram, and then at _Taylor_Kitchen_. I know it's wordy, on Twitter and on TikTok. So those are the places to find me. And also Toby Christie on all social media platforms is where I have my full length work.
Thank you again, Taylor Kitchen, for your interview, and best of luck in your future with Above the Yellow Line.
Thank you so much.
You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Instagram and Brandon Sports Talk Twitter at @talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Taylor Kitchen, for your interview, and best of luck in your future.
Thanks.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.